You're listening to the Place Northwest podcast, your digital resource for the latest insight and analysis on all things property in the northwest of England. Listen when you want, where you want.
Hello to our listeners. Welcome to this podcast hosted by Place Northwest and the public affairs consultancy Cratus Communications. I'm Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest, and I'm joined today by Sean Anstee, Executive Director for Advisory, Public Affairs and PR at Cratus and former leader of Trafford Council, and by Councillor Elise Wilson, leader of Stockport Council and portfolio lead for business and economy at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. The three of us wanted to get together and have a bit of a far-reaching discussion about 2020, how it has impacted the public sector, the private sector, placemaking and politics in general in the Northwest, and of course what the future holds. We certainly didn't expect to be in another lockdown when we first started planning this podcast, but here we are, and I can think of far worse things than spending an afternoon virtually chewing the fat with two of the biggest names in regional property and policy making. So just before we start, some further background about Cratus. The company was established in 2009 and has built up a solid reputation for helping the private sector to navigate the complexities of the public sector in the more than 10 years since. Earlier this year, Cratus made its first foray into the north of England, opening an office at Manchester's 125 Deansgate, headed up by Sean. The company, whose services cover traditional planning communications, together with public affairs, local government advisory and community engagement activity, recently hired an account executive to work alongside Sean, and it's looking to expand further in 2021. Elise Wilson was born and raised in Stockport and was elected as a Labour councillor in the Davenport and Cllr Green ward in 2014. Prior to becoming leader of Stockport Council in May 2019, she served as cabinet member at the council, responsible for reform and governance. So Sean and Elise, welcome to you both.
Thanks very much, Sarah.
Hi.
What have been the biggest challenges you've had to grapple with, both personally and professionally, since this situation really started to impact the UK?
So personally and professionally, I think it's like everybody else, really. It's how we've managed keeping the children in school and what we've done with them when they've not been in school, and how I run a business as well, my husband. So how we've been, trying to keep the business afloat, and how we've managed that, and that's really challenging. And I think there's plenty of people who are self-employed or small business owners like us who are probably juggling the very same issues that we're facing day to day. And then in terms of as a council, what we've had to do has been actually monumental, standing up for humanitarian aid, supporting vulnerable people, keeping in touch with people, getting help to people, but also really participating and managing this public health crisis, that we knew was going to be more than just a public health crisis, but also have significant effects on our economy, which we didn't know how big or how far or how deep any scarring might be to that economy, and trying to work proactively as part of a team, both within Greater Manchester, but also with government, to really keep people safe and well, to protect the NHS, and but also find a route through so that we can all, or as many of us as possible, can get through this and see each other at the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to think of another sort of situation in recent years where regional and local government have had to be so aligned with central government, isn't it, in terms of their response to all of this? What about you, Sean? How have you found things?
Well, I mean, Sarah, I think as you said, I joined Cratus in March, and that was a week before the first lockdown that occurred. And so it has been one of the most surreal induction periods. You sort of get to meet your team sort of very briefly, and then you see people through these rectangular shapes on screens for 6 months as you try and sort of go about keeping going. And I think that's what I reflect on really over the last 6 or 7 months is not just in the private sector, but in local authorities themselves, as Elise has just sort of mentioned. They've been sort of turned upside down, really. And the pandemic, in many respects, has been a catalyst for how we go about business and how we go about survival, really, if you think about it. And I think often when you go about changing things, sometimes making change is difficult, but when you have no choice on change, it is quite incredible how resilient people have been. And you've seen that across the Northwest, actually, and indeed across the country, where, people are sort of saying, well, look, we have this public health crisis. You can't really choose whether it's here or not. It clearly is here. What you can choose is how you respond to it. And I think there's been, some great examples of both how the private sector has sort of come up to try and keep people going, how government and local government, maybe not always getting things right, but nobody always gets things right, but really, really saying that we are going to come through this one way or another, and we're going to keep on supporting each other. It's been quite incredible to see, really.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, Stockport, for example, in East, I mean, Edison, you've announced some lots of long-term regeneration projects this year. You've got the 15-year station revamp, £500 million, I think, is the projected sort of investment value. And you guys certainly haven't been slowing down your end, have you?
No, and I think it comes back to what we were saying around our economy and the wider impacts of what this crisis is going to mean for people. And I think you need to, for me, uh, it's keeping your foot on the pedal. It's important that we continue to remain ambitious for the people of Stockport, and that we continue to show that we still plan to do things, and we still have plans, and we're still excited and enthusiastic about those plans. So yes, there's the train station prospectus, but I think that's just one part, if you like, of many things that we're still really trying to push forward on, because how people live, and I guess this was kind of true before the crisis, but the role of towns, and Stockport's a town borough, we're a suburb, and I guess the role of towns and how people want to live is is evolving, and getting a balance is a slight shift in balance, and getting that right, I think, is what's important, and really recognizing that people want something slightly different now, and what the digital age brings to how we can live, and what opportunities there are now for people.
And we're thinking at Cratus about how we sort of try and facilitate some of that conversation, because how we think about our places, and therefore the role of local authorities who in March, April, May, June, and indeed still today, had the immediacy of a public health crisis to respond to, now not only have to carry on responding to a health crisis, but need to, at the same time, shift their attentions to, well, what is their local place going to be like? How is the economy going to change and repurpose itself? To Elise's point, as people perhaps might spend more time in the suburbs, might spend more time in towns, our high streets, we've said for a long time, are going to be changing. Well, there is a real space for councils and the private sector in tandem to say, well, this is what it's going to be like. And I think there'll be some first mover advantage to whichever local authority and place gets hold of that with both hands and runs with it.
I mean, do you think actually the relationship between communities then and their councils, their local authorities, do you think that's actually become sort of stronger then, and as people have sort of almost developed a stronger sense of place, they've been spending more time in it. They really know what they want from their immediate kind of local areas, and I guess the pandemic has sort of hit everyone in just about every way, hasn't it? Economically, practically, um, socially. I mean, yeah, perhaps the relationship has actually deepened as a result. Do you think?
I'd say so. I think, kind of in three spaces, really. One is we've delivered humanitarian aid, the kind of which we haven't seen delivered in the UK to our own residents. As a country, we've done humanitarian aid, but it's invariably to somewhere else. To have done what we've done has put us in contact with people who we maybe haven't had direct contact with before, or really giving a human face to the council that people haven't seen before. So the relationship there is stronger. I'd say the work we're doing with our businesses in our boroughs is also actually really made a difference. So in Stockport, we know, because we've been working so closely with our businesses in Stockport, who at the big, at the height of the pandemic was meeting every single day. There was a group of them that had volunteered their time to meet every single day to work with the council and others to really help, keep businesses afloat, support businesses, get information out. And we've had businesses come back and says, I've never worked with the council before. I was always put off a bit, but actually working with you has been really good. So that
Mm,
relationship's better. And then I'd say what you were saying before about people thought maybe they couldn't work from home before, only now they've realized actually it might work for them in a more long-term way, or actually they hate it and they can't wait to get back in the office. I think that's also true. But people's local communities and environment, people have taken more notice of it, I think, and we've seen a lot of that through things like the cycling and walking and parks and green spaces, and um, the kind of the feelings people have around that has really ramped up, I think. So yes, I
mm,
think the relationship is stronger. I think people are more interested, but I think it's still going to be difficult because the scale of what a council does, and Sean will know this, like everything from adult social care, public health, children's services at one, and all the way through to emptying your bins and your potholes, and spatial policy for planning. It's vast, the things you cover, really. And I think that can be quite hard for people because it is so vast to kind of get your head
mm,
around.
yeah. I mean, on that point, that makes me sort of think about another point, another facet to this conversation, which is the relationship between councils and central government. And obviously we've seen numerous kind of pots of money being created by the government, and we that councils have been bidding for to kind of help them deliver both some of the emergency services that have been required, but also sort of the longer term economic recovery initiatives and property placemaking development initiatives. And I wonder if there's any, if you both feel like there's been some sort of real lessons learnt, perhaps on both sides, about how the different tiers of government have to cooperate together in times like these and in the years after. What do you think about that, Sean?
I think it's a fascinating example over the last 6 months of the dependency that local government has on central government. We know that we live in one of the most centralised countries in Europe, if not the world. Um, and what you've seen play out over the last 6 months is this debate, I suppose, about expectations, about who does what, where, and when. And so, and that's just a general view that I think I hold about, what do the public think of their politicians, and they hold them at standards that are incredibly high and challenging, and I suppose quite rightly so. But sometimes that makes it difficult. But if you take, for example, um, you know, ultimately, I think there are certain things that probably need to happen at a national level. And there are certain, whether it's how does lockdown work? How's the vaccine program going to work? What do you do with local public health directors? And there is clearly more to do about really defining. Free school meals is another example. Do you have a national programme for summer holidays that continues, or do you do what councils want and fund them, but fund them properly? And so I think you've almost had this tension playing out where, as most people would know, I'm a huge advocate of empowering sort of councils to get on and do the job. But equally, if that's going to be the case, then we have to reset what our expectations of central government is going to be. And I really hope in the months, and especially around sort of economic rebuilding. So this is, we've talked a long time about the gap between the sort of south and the north, and even within Greater Manchester, what do you do with sort of a prosperous southern sort of Greater Mancunian economy, and what do you do with a how do you make sure the strengths of the north of Greater Manchester are played as well? And that's only that, there's no way that is going to be designed by the Department for Business or the Ministry of Communities and Local Government in Whitehall. That is going to be done in places, and therefore the conversation in the weeks ahead needs to be, how do you make sure that people like Elise with the Greater Manchester role around the business and the economy, is there? What do we? How do you empower that and make that happen? I think will be really important to the future.
I think I have to say I agree with Sean a lot of it. The space between where national government is and real people's lives seems vast, and so the role of local government is important. We've seen how local government becomes the delivery arm o- o- of government, if you like, in its widest sense, because we're the ones on the ground, and we're the ones closest to our communities, and I think how that develops over over the longer term is going to be really important. I mean, I am going to have to say, funding local government properly in a kind of sustainable over a medium term, instead of pots of money that you bid in left, right, and centre, it has to be part of that solution. But I would say, and maybe that's because my council's a council under no overall control. That means there's lots of different politics going on in that council chamber, and it means that to get things done, you have to find a way to work with people, and you have to go in a genuine way to say, okay, I'm listening. What are you saying? And how do we find a collective route through for that? And so I don't see, as a private business owner and somebody in local government, I don't see how the two don't work well together. To me, they work well together. There's no reason why you have to be exclusive and why you can't be more inclusive in your approach. And I would take that to government as well, and sort of say, I think that we need to move away from us and them, and we use a lot of us and them in all kinds of bits of life. And we need to start moving away from that and finding a more inclusive way forward. And say like the MDC, Stockport Mayoral Development Corporation. We've got in there basically different political parties. We've got a local government, we've got the combined authority in Greater Manchester and the mayor involved, we've got national government in there, and we've got the private sector in there. And it's like, and we're going to be doing amazing things there. We're already delivering amazing things, and what the future holds for the MDC is bright, and that's because it's the ecosystem. We're bigger than the sum of our parts. It's actually, what do we all bring to the table, and we all bring our own thing, and it's recognizing that sometimes the best parties are the bring your own parties, aren't they? And I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, and the sort of I think perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a positive thing that's come out of this pandemic struck year has been the move towards digital engagement in planning, a digital planning process. Sean, you've probably got some like insight into this, because you've been probably running a lot of these like digital planning consultations for on behalf of people. But do you think that's actually ended up getting a broader range of potential stakeholders on board, and actually helping to tap into some sort of like hard to reach parts of the local community?
I think it gives us a different audience to aim for, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the previous audience. So the people who would sort of turn up to the village hall and give you comments and feedback on consultations that were sort of being run. I mean, we launched Cratus Engage in April, which was very quickly after the lockdown, to sort of say, well, look, the show must go on. And this is my theme for the year, really, is that regardless of what's thrown at us, we have to find a way of keeping the show on the road. And that's, as Elise has mentioned about her business, we've done the same with our business at, Place Northwest, we've done the same with your business. And ultimately, this is about saying that there are tools that are at our disposal that we have to find a way of navigating through. And if you take that conversation about where investment is going to go in the future, the competition for investment is going to increase significantly in the months and years ahead as places try and come out of sort of economic challenge and prosper. And therefore, what really needs to happen, I think, is that councils and local authorities need to be easy to do business with. I think they need to be engaging with their communities, with residents, and as Elise has mentioned, with the private sector. We need to be thinking about, well, just because something might have been done a certain way before, doesn't mean it has to be a certain way in the future. And if we've learned anything from the pandemic, trying to enable that to happen in a really constructive way, ultimately for the benefit of communities, because that's what we're all here for, is to make our places better places to live and to make sure that people can support their families and all that sort of stuff. Hopefully that's what we can take from the pandemic.
Mm. What do you think about? I think also it's sort of shown how you mentioned earlier this issue of sort of managing expectations and sort of within this greater communication. I guess there's a risk that sort of expectations get higher, or I think that's a really interesting point, perhaps. And we saw as well how on the funding issue, we saw how absolutely sort of up in arms a lot of the local Greater Manchester community was when there was the whole funding sort of spat, wasn't there, between central government and between Mayor Andy Burnham, and wanting to make sure that the communities of Greater Manchester got the right amount of money that was going to support them through this crisis. And I think maybe with greater engagement from the local people, there needs to be that sort of management of expectations, and sort of communication will become even more key, I guess.
I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, there's been a number of events, and that's one of them. In the end, I think, and as an observer looking in now, this was an argument in the end of about £5 million.
Yeah.
This is a pandemic that's cost us £210 billion up to now. I mean, you sort of think in the grand scheme of things, there must be a way of finding a solution to that, and in some respects, regardless of how that played out, it demonstrates to us that we have to do more to try and keep people who may have slightly varying opinions on certain things. Almost to Elise's point earlier, in any sort of negotiation, there is always common ground, or in any debate, there is always common ground. And that's what we try and do at Cratus, is find people's sort of common ground when they're engaging with each other. But actually, that lesson is true of central and local government. That lesson is true of councils and communities. Even if there's a difference of opinion, you have to find a way through, because that's the only way really that our politics is going to work for people, so that they don't feel put off by it.
Mm-hmm. Elise, what would you say about sort of how councils work specifically with central government then on sort of funding issues? Do you think you've learned some really useful lessons from this sort of pandemic situation that hopefully will kind of continue in the years ahead? And do you think central government from any conversations and sort of involvement you've had have kind of picked up on this and learned lessons too?
Oh. And I'm groaning because I'm not sure we're there yet. I'm not sure if those lessons have been learned, and I can't speak for other local authorities. I can only speak for Stockport, and as far as Stockport's concerned, I feel we are an inclusive council that engages on various levels with all kinds of people. And if you're interested and committed to delivering for the people of Stockport, then we want to hear from you. We're happy to talk, and we don't really mind. We're happy to listen and engage. But what the difficulty we've had, and I felt, and the real frustration I felt is, there isn't the same feeling back from government. It feels like government's had this massive crisis to deal with, and to a certain extent, and I'm not sure if I'm being fair or not, but it panicked, and it drew the drawbridges up a little bit and cocooned itself into, right, well, now we have to do this thing and we're going to tell everybody what to do. And there was it's like there is no route through to. You can knock on the door as often as you like and say, listen, we've got some great ideas, we really think we can help, in this crisis, and yet you're getting zero traction with it, and you're not feeling like you can influence. And like Sean said before, it came down to like £5 million, but when a council's looking at tens of millions of pounds, gap in their funding, and they've got to find that out of services that people rely on, it's huge for us. And it seemed like such a small thing really in the end, and that could have been resolved. And to me, there's been a real lack of just listening and engagement. And I think if I was, say, the feedback I'd be getting is engage genuinely, listen genuinely, and you'll find that actually people will want to help because they will want to make their places a better place. They will want to deliver for their people, and when they've delivered for their people, that it'll deliver for the government as well. If we want, what's the role in Stockport within Greater Manchester, and what's Greater Manchester's role to the UK? Because we've got this double whammy of not just having a crisis to deal with, but Brexit, and what's the relationship with the EU going to be in the future, and what's our relationship going to be on an international scale, and therefore what role does Greater Manchester have within that? And I think there's a real opportunity to make as much of a success of the opportunities that come about than than just kind of not engaging with us, and then potentially holding ourselves back a little.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not sure, and like I said, I realise I'm probably being a bit harsh, but I'm not sure government has learned its lessons yet.
Mm. And maybe, yeah, in the meantime, it's sort of all about it's sort of the onus is on councils, isn't it, to sort of really communicate and sort of promote all of the great efforts you guys have been making in terms of getting new investment on board and creating new visions for the future of your towns and everything. And that will continue to be important. But yeah, as you say, uh, it's going to also be crucial for central government to recognise that.
Yeah, and I do want to caveat what I just said. I appreciate that they've been dealing with a crisis, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. And there's a serious amount of firefighting that's had to be done, and not everything. I'm not poo-pooing everything, but I'm saying if you're going to start leading and you want to. You need to look at the horizon. You need to see what's coming, and you need to be able to learn your lessons fast. You need to be agile in that. You fail, fail early and learn fast, and I'm not sure central government are there yet.
I thought it would be nice to wrap up with asking you each, um, what's your sort of your key ask? I mean, aside from getting a vaccine over the line, there's been a lot of good news on that front lately. But what are your top asks for 2021 to really help the region and the country, I suppose, in turn, to get itself together after a really rough period? What would you say to that, Sean?
I think I'm not entirely sure whether I'd categorise this as an ask, but for me, the word that's sort of been missing over the last 6 or 7 months when we talk about recovery is confidence. And what I mean by that is, at some point, we are going to have to be far more confident, far more as a population of people and organisations that are sort of working in the northwest. To say that that there is light at the end of the tunnel, like we're going to make progress towards it, and here's how we're going to do it. So I suppose really what I want to see from everybody in the north is this idea that we can do it. We know that it's going to need people to go out and be a bit more confident in what because ultimately going into a pandemic is one thing, coming out of it is entirely a different thing altogether. And that some people will think differently about what they're comfortable and not comfortable doing, and so therefore I think everybody, whether it's in councils or business or shops or so on, needs to really think about how we make people feel confident to return to either the lives that they had or the new lives that they'll have in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Sean. What about you, Elise? Yeah.
Do you know, I was going to say the same thing. You're not going to believe that, are you? But confidence is going to be absolutely key. I guess to build on that, I'd say creating confidence requires a certain amount of uh, knowing what's coming a little bit, creating some stability, and trying to um, create some certainty for businesses so that we don't lurch from one thing that's announced at like the last minute and then happens really quickly afterwards, but actually what's it like to live with this virus, how are we going to do that effectively so that we can keep people safe and well, but we can tackle some of the other issues. Mental health, I'm really concerned about that. So how do we live with it so that we're not causing ourselves other problems in other ways, whether that is the economy or that is things like mental health. And I'd say from government, I guess my ask is help us create some of that certainty so that we know what our funding is, not just for now, not just a pot of money that we can bid for this thing, or a little tranche of money to tackle this issue, but actually, some kind of medium term package that allows us a degree of flexibility so that we can really target what we need and evolve for today, and help us create that confidence that's going to attract investment. Because if we're not confident and creating that confidence, then investors are going to go, oh, should we, is now the time, is now not the time, do we go for this? And I want to take those people that have been made redundant who've thought, do you know what, I've always wanted to run my own business, I've always wanted to try this thing or turn my hobby into something that makes money. I want you to take that redundancy money and do it, try it. But to take that risk, you've got to have confidence. And so, how can we create that? So, I'd say Sean's hit the nail on the head, but I'd go with a bit of certainty to kind of help create that confidence.
Brilliant. I think that's a good place to end, both of you, on a positive note, and looking at kind of this potential for some great support that can come from people's local governments, to sort of support them in the months and year ahead. So yeah, thank you so much to you both. I've been Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest. We've had Councillor Elise Wilson, leader of Stockport Council, and Sean Anstee, Executive Director for Advisory, Public Affairs and PR at Cratus. So thanks so much to you both, and hope you've enjoyed this podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.